Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have a very interesting headline from Politico which talks about the idea of Republican Senator Joni Ernst not running for re-election and possibly retiring in 2026. Now at the time I'm recording this video, Joni Ernst has not officially made a decision yet for 2026, but the two-term Iowa senator hasn't officially announced her plans for 2026 either, though she has gone through some of the motions of launching another campaign, including recently hiring someone to manage it and announcing her annual fall fundraiser. But three people who granted anonymity to disclose private discussions said there is a rising concern among fellow Senate Republicans that Ernst will rather retire than run for re-election, giving Republicans another seat to defend next fall. Many will be watching closely for clues next week when Ernst files new campaign fundraising totals. She raised just over $1 million in the first quarter of 2025, a solid but not overwhelming number for an end-cycle senator. Asked about the senator's 2026 plans, Ernst spokesperson Palmer Brigham declined to say definitively that she would run again, saying Senator Ernst is focused on her work delivering for Iowans in the Senate to make Washington squeal, making President Trump's historic tax cuts permanent through the One Big Beautiful Bill, and advancing a strong NDAA. Ernst has told people as recently as this past month that she is still considering whether she wants to run again, according to a fourth person granted anonymity to discuss the matter. Iowa isn't in the top tier of potential pickup opportunities for Democrats. Their best bets are the seat being vacated by Tom Tillis in North Carolina and Susan Collins in Maine. But Democrats do view Iowa as being in play, especially if Trump and his party are facing steep headwinds by next November. When asked about Ernst, Senate Majority Leader John Thune said in a brief interview Thursday, "I'm doing everything I can to encourage her to run for re-election. Ultimately, that's a decision she'd have to make. I think she's moving forward," Thune said. Multiple Democrats are already in this race, including Iowa State Senator Zach Wahls and Iowa State Representative J.D. Scholten. If Ernst were to decide not to run, Republicans believe they already have at least one compelling candidate waiting in the wings. Two of the people who granted anonymity said that Representative Ashley Hinson is highly likely to enter the race if Ernst does decide to bow out. Hinson, a former TV news anchor, is the most formidable fundraiser in the Iowa House delegation. The $2.2 million she reported in her campaign coffers earlier this year was only about $800,000 behind what Ernst had available to spend. Hinson and multiple aides did not respond to requests for comments on this news. And then the article goes into a bit of backstory on Ernst and some of her recent comments she's made over the past few years. I've done videos covering that, so if you do want to, there's other videos I've done you can check out for that if you're interested in that front. So this is very interesting, because it's been long assumed now that Joni Ernst was going to be the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate again in 2026 as the incumbent U.S. Senator. But let's go down the possibility of maybe she decides not to. Well, then I think Ashley Hinson, the U.S. Representative, is more likely going to be the Republican nominee and candidate if she does decide to run. On the Democratic side of things remain pretty similar no matter what. Nathan Sage, J.D. Scholten, and Zach Wahls are three Democrats that are running in this race already. Two other Democrats, Jackie Norris, the chair of the Des Moines School Board and former Chief of Staff to the First Lady of the United States, 2009-2011 for Michelle Obama. It is very possible she could enter this race. She has expressed interest in running, as well as Joshua Turek, a state representative from the 20th District. So the candidates for the Democratic side have already established themselves who they are going to be. But right now, this race still shows it could become relatively competitive. Inside Elections has it as solid Republican. Click Political Report and Saddle Crystal Ball have it as likely Republican, and Race to the White House has it as lean Republican. Now, in the early hypothetical polling, there was only one poll done by the Democratic Public Policy Polling that showed Ernst against a generic Democrat was only about a 2-point difference. And Ernst is someone the Democrats are targeting a lot in 2026. Even though Iowa in 2024 voted for Donald Trump by 13.2%, that is a likely Republican win. At the Senate level, the last election was in 2022, where Senator Chuck Grassley won by 12.2%. But in 2020, Joni Ernst only won by 6.5%. Still a likely Republican win, but a lot more of a solid Republican win than both Trump and Grassley had in the state of Iowa. It should be worth noting when Ernst first got elected back in 2014, she won by 8.3%. Another likely Republican win, but of the two senators from Iowa, Ernst seems to be the one that's more vulnerable to a potential Democratic upset than Chuck Grassley, the other senator from Iowa. So Iowa is a state that has certainly moved into the likely Republican direction. From 2020 to 2024, Iowa shifted 5 more points towards President Trump. From 2016 to 2024, Iowa shifted 3.8% more towards the Republican direction. Just to give you an idea, from 2012 to 2024, Iowa has shifted roughly 19 points from Mitt Romney to Donald Trump in 2012 to 2024. So Iowa's moving to be a lot more reliable red state. But Democrats are hoping in a midterm election environment that should be the most Democratic favorable election they've had in a pretty long time now, that maybe Iowa could be competitive. And I think a lot of Democrats will acknowledge the fact that this Senate race in Iowa, when everything is said and done, is likely going to be a Republican win. But the Democrats are hoping for a strong enough midterm election environment where President Trump and the Republicans are doing so poorly that maybe that spills over into a state like Iowa potentially being competitive. Now, as for the 2026 Senate map right now, I do currently have Iowa in the likely Republican category, and if Joni Ernst is the Republican nominee, I will be leaving it in that threshold. However, I do think Ernst has the possibility of winning here in the smaller end of that likely side, around a 6.5 to 7 point victory once again. If Joni Ernst is not, I could see Democrats feeling very optimistic, similar with North Carolina with Tom Tillis retiring, saying that without an incumbent in the race, the Democrats have a better chance of winning. And I actually think that one's a little bit more of a mixed bag in Iowa. I think Ashley Hinton would be a pretty strong Republican candidate, and she also would not have the baggage of some of the statements that Joni Ernst has made in the last few weeks or so. Specifically, I believe it was about Medicare and her "we're all going to die" comment. That certainly is going to rub voters the wrong way in Iowa for sure. But with Ashley Hinton in this race, she wouldn't have that baggage. The only baggage she would have would be running as a Republican in a midterm election that's supposed to be Democratic favorable. So I think if it's Ashley Hinton, I think Iowa still remains in the likely Republican category. It's interesting because the governor's race I actually do have going lean Republican, so Iowa could potentially get more competitive, but I think the Senate race is more likely to stay in the Republican side of things, where the governor's race could potentially get close. As for how Iowa voted in 2024, as I mentioned, a 13.2% win for President Trump. He won by a lot. He won almost every single county in the state. President Trump was able even to defeat Kamala Harris in Davenport and Scott County in Davenport, Iowa, one of the largest cities in Iowa. Trump was able to win there. Cedar Rapids ended up going for Kamala Harris by about 10 points, 54-44. And Des Moines, the capital of Iowa, did go for Kamala Harris 55-44. But you can see President Trump really drove up the numbers in a lot of these rural counties and such throughout Iowa, including in Sioux City as well, where Trump won 61-38. So for the Democrats, winning a Senate race in Iowa in 2026 is going to be an uphill battle, and I think it likely will remain that way pretty much no matter what. But if the election environment got so bad for the Republicans that Democrats are winning the generic ballot by like 9 or 10 points or something, I could see Iowa getting very competitive. And if Joni Ernst is the incumbent, or if the race is open, I could see it being a competitive race. But given how Iowa has trended over the last few election cycles, I think it's more likely than not we're going to see Iowa continue to be a likely Republican state. But I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. What do you think about this election? Do you think Joni Ernst will run for re-election again, or will she not? Do you think it's possible the Democrats could actually elect a senator from Iowa again in 2026? Leave your thoughts all down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the Senate race in the state of Michigan, and a new Republican-sponsored poll for the Democratic primary in Michigan shows where things currently stand at this time. So, if you're unfamiliar, the Senate race in Michigan is going to be an open race, as Democratic incumbent Senator Gary Peters will not be running for re-election. So it's going to be an open primary for both the Democrats and the Republicans in the state of Michigan. Michigan's one of the closest races closest states, in American politics. President Trump won it very narrowly in 2016. Joe Biden won it by a lean margin in 2020, and then Donald Trump won it by a lean margin in 2024. So it consistently has been one of the closest states in the United States at the presidential level across the last 3 presidential elections. Now, in 2024, there was a Senate race between the Democrat Elisa Slotkin and the Republican Mike Rogers, who was also running again for Senate in 2026, that ended up being very, very close, under 1% margin of victory in that race. So Michigan's Senate race in 2026 is expected to be one of the closest races in the country. On the Democratic side, Representative Haley Stevens of the 11th District of Michigan is running, as well as former public health official Abdul El-Sayed, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, and former Michigan State House Speaker Joe Tate are all currently in the race, running to be the other senator from Michigan. A new poll that was just commissioned a few days ago, as the time I'm recording this, by the National Republican Senatorial Committee. This is the part of the National Republicans that are trying to get more Republicans elected. And it's found that no clear frontrunner is in this race, but over 40% of the vote of Democratic respondents saying they remain undecided. Stevens, the congresswoman since 2019, and Abdul El-Sayed, who's backed by progressive independent Senator Bernie Sanders, led at 24% to Sayed's 22%. So they're very, very close in that matchup right there. While Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow received 11%, and Joe Tate registered around 1%. The poll surveyed roughly 582 likely Democratic primary voters between July 4th and 7th and contains a 2.95% margin of error. Now, this is very significant because this means that Haley Stevens and Abdul El-Sayed are technically within the margin of error. If you look at it in a favorable view of Sayed, you could argue that Sayed and Stevens are tied. Now, that can go the other way as well, where you could say that Stevens is really up about 5 points over Sayed, but no matter how you look at it, this is a very close race on the Democratic side. And the poll goes into some of the key issues as well. But for the purpose of today's video, I just want to mention that part. This primary is going to be very close with Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, Haley Stevens, and Joe Tate all in the race at this time. Another key Democrat we're waiting to see what happens here is Dana Nessel, the Attorney General of Michigan. If she were to enter this race, she does hold the highest name recognition office of Attorney General of Michigan in this race. Second to her would be U.S. Representative Haley Stevens, but being the Attorney General of the state would likely start out with a pretty decent floor of support due to the fact that she holds that office. Now, as the article mentioned, Abdul El-Sayed does have the endorsement of U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders and U.S. Representative Ro Khanna. McMorrow has the endorsement of 2 state senators, Mari Manoogian and Zach Walz, Iowa State Senator, as well. Haley Stevens has the endorsement of the former governor of Michigan, James Blanchard, as well as U.S. Representatives Lois Frankel, Nancy Pelosi, former House Speaker for a decent while there, and Hillary Scholten as well of the 3rd District, as well as the organization AIPAC, the American Israeli PAC Affairs Committee, as well. So it's also worth noting the Democratic Senator of Michigan, Elisa Slotkin, has also refused to make an endorsement or declined to endorse in this race. So far, there's been 3 polls done, one by the NRC, the Republican poll, one by Global Strategy Group, a Democratic poll, which is sponsored by McMorrow's campaign, and a group, the Glenn Gariff Group as well, a poll sponsored by the Detroit Regional Chamber. And it showed a very wide open Democratic primary, really, in all 3 polls. Right now, there's a large amount of undecided voters, 42% in the Republican poll, 37% in the McMorrow Democratic poll, and 30% in the Glenn Gariff poll. So a lot of undecided vote left. This is going to be one of the more competitive, wide open Democratic primaries in 2026. However, Haley Stevens has held a narrow lead over these polls. In the recent NRC poll, it showed Sayed in 2nd, Stevens in 1st, McMorrow in 3rd. In the McMorrow poll, this is again favorable to her. It showed Stevens in 1st, McMorrow in 2nd, and El-Sayed in 3rd. In the Glenn Gariff poll, it showed Stevens in 1st, with Glenn Gariff leading, or with Abdul El-Sayed in 2nd, and McMorrow in 3rd. So that seems to be the trend right now, is Haley Stevens is in 1st place, Abdul El-Sayed is in 2nd place, and Mallory McMorrow is in 3rd place. On the Republican side of things, right now U.S. Representative Mike Rogers is currently the only notable Republican in this race, though that's expected to change as U.S. Representative Bill Huizenga is considering entering the race, and an announcement is pending for later on in July. That could be happening any day now. By the time you're hearing this video, he may have even declared to be in this race. It's likely going to be Mike Rogers again as the nominee, but Bill Huizenga, if he gets the endorsement of President Trump, could potentially get it as well. In that hypothetical polling between Rogers and Huizenga, when it was just Rogers and Huizenga in the poll, Rogers led over Huizenga by about 28%. In the most recent Fabrizio Lee and Associates poll, and then in that same Glenn Garriff group poll, Rogers had a large lead over Huizenga, 61-17. Now, this race is obviously going to be very close, as the Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Sablo Crystal Ball all have the race listed as a toss-up. Race to the White House has it listed as nearly in the Democrats' favor at tilt Democrat. Now, for the head-to-head matchups, it shows that in the Democratic Normanton Pets poll, this has Haley Stevens leading over Mike Rogers on the quote-unquote uninformed voters aspect of it, with 8% undecided. Stevens leads 47-45 over Rogers. After voters are informed, it says Stevens gets up to 49%, Rogers 48%, 3% are undecided. Now, that particular matchup, that 49-48%, does look eerily similar to the Senate race from 2024, where Slotkin got about 48.6%, Rogers got 48.3%. Now, in that Glenn Garriff group poll, kind of a similar situation here with voters and then with definite voters here. Stevens starts out a 1-point favorite over Rogers, 45-44, with 11% undecided. And then with definite voters, it's 49-43 for Stevens over Rogers, with 8% undecided at that point. And then a Target Insight poll from back in March, a lot more undecided vote. In this one, Rogers leads 41-35, with 24% undecided, though, so I'm not really sure how much you can take away from that one. For Abdul Al-Sayed versus Mike Rogers, Rogers performs a lot stronger, and Abdul Al-Sayed seems to perform a bit weaker than Haley Stevens does, where first Rogers leads 47-41 against Sayed with 12% undecided, and then definite voters, which again broke for Stevens 49-48, and this one Rogers has 47, but Sayed only has 45, so a lot more undecided vote on that one as well. For McMorrow versus Rogers, again in that sponsored Normanton Pets Democratic poll, Rogers starts out leading 48-44 versus McMorrow, but then again, among informed voters, McMorrow goes up to 51-47 versus Rogers with 2% undecided. In that Glenn Garriff poll, Rogers starts out 46-42, leading, and then definite voters, it ends up being 46-44 with 10% undecided. So right now, it looks like Stevens versus Rogers would be a very competitive race, where it looks like Stevens has a little bit of a lead over Rogers. For Abdul Al-Sayed versus Mike Rogers, it looks like Mike Rogers actually starts out with a higher floor of support, and he has a lead in that one. For McMorrow, it looks like it's kind of a mix. It's kind of a 50-50 race on that one, but McMorrow may narrowly have an edge, but there's a lot more undecided vote in that one, in large part due to the fact McMorrow is probably not as well known in the state of Michigan as Haley Stevens is, and even as Abdul Al-Sayed is. So that could get very interesting. Now, Michigan, as I mentioned, the Senate race in 2024 was only a 0.34% margin of victory for Slotkin versus Republican Mike Rogers. It was a very close race, Slotkin getting about 2,712,686 votes, Rogers getting about 2,693,680 votes. So roughly 20,000 votes separating Slotkin and Rogers in this very close race. Now, that is worth noting, that was on the same ballot where President Trump defeated Kamala Harris by 1.4% in the state of Michigan, 49.73% to 48.31%. And in this one, President Trump got 2,816,636 votes to Kamala Harris's 2,736,533 votes. So President Trump's margin of victory was roughly 80,000 votes over Kamala Harris, whereas Lisa Slotkin was able to win over Mike Rogers by roughly 20,000 votes. So it seems there was a lot of vote fall off here. Slotkin only performed roughly 20,000 votes or so under what Kamala Harris did, but Mike Rogers fell about, 100,000 votes or so, even more than 100,000 votes than Donald Trump got. So there was a lot of Republicans that did not vote for Mike Rogers that did vote for President Trump. And that could be a big issue if Rogers is the nominee for Senate again for the Republicans in 2026. As this time around, not only will President Trump not be at the top of the ticket to help Mike Rogers get votes, but it'll also be an election cycle that should be more Democratic friendly after 2 years of President Trump serving as president in the second term. Usually midterms go against the president and the president's party. So that actually could give the Democrats an added boost in that regard. Now, for my current prediction for this race at this time, I do have it as one of 3 Senate seats that I have a toss-up right now: Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia. If I were to make a prediction on this race right now, I would have it being very close, but I do have it starting out as tilt Democrat, meaning a 1% win for the Democrats or less. I do think with the election environment, it makes sense the Democrats would be favored to win this seat, though I do think with a wide-open Democratic primary that's going to keep this very close. If it was one Democratic candidate going up against one Republican candidate, it would give the Democrats more time to get more well-known statewide. But with such a contentious primary, I think it will remain very close. But again, with the election environment being more Democratic-friendly and Mike Rogers losing when President Trump was on the ballot, I'm kind of having a hard time seeing him win without President Trump leading the ticket to help him out. So I do have the Democrats winning the Michigan Senate race for 2026. But I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think is going to happen in this race. Do you think that Mike Rogers could win, or do you think that one of the Democrats, whoever ends up winning the primary, ends up winning this race? And who do you think will end up winning the primary? Leave all your thoughts down below. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 Texas Senate race, and something that as of the time of recording this video is a headline going around online, which is, could Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett actually run for the Democratic primary in Texas? And a new Republican sponsored poll shows a very interesting insight. So the recent polling shows that Democratic Representative Jasmine Crockett at the forefront of likely Democratic voters' preference in the race for a U.S. Senate seat that will be up for grabs in the 2026 midterms. The 2026 Texas Senate race is viewed as pivotal by both parties, with implications for the control of the upper chamber of Congress. Texas has remained a Republican stronghold in recent election cycles, despite high-profile Democratic bids from former U.S. Representative Beto O'Rourke and Colin Allred. Flipping the seat currently held by Republican Senator John Cornyn would represent a major political shift in the state and in the nation. Crockett has not yet declared a run for Senate, but has been viewed by many as a rising star in the Democratic Party on the national stage. Her rise has also drawn significant criticism and backlash from Republicans. Now, Crockett led in a new poll with 35% support among surveyed Democratic voters, ahead of Allred at 20%, with O'Rourke and Texas Representative Joaquin Castro both at 13%. Now, the survey was conducted by the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the NRSC, which is supporting John Cornyn's campaign against Republican Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. O'Rourke and Castro have not yet declared their candidacies, but both remain possible entrants as the December filing deadline approaches. 18% of respondents remain undecided about the preferred nominee to challenge the Republican candidate. Newsweek did reach out to Crockett's office for a comment. The poll, which was initially obtained by the Daily Caller, surveyed 566 likely Democratic primary voters and was conducted between July 4th and 7th. Crockett's margin against her Democratic counterparts far exceeds the poll's margin of error of plus or minus 3.03%. Crockett was also the top choice for shared values among the likely Democratic voters in the University of Texas at Tyler poll, conducted between May 28th and June 7th, garnering 30% support. However, when respondents were asked who had the best chance of defeating a Republican, Allred edged into the lead at 34% versus Crockett's 27%. Allred, who lost to Senator Ted Cruz by 9 points back in November of 2024, officially launched his campaign on July 1st. I did do a video covering that as well, so make sure to check that out if you want more information about Colin Allred and all that. He has positioned himself as a potential nominee with a broader general election appeal, especially if Paxton prevails in a contentious Republican primary to unseat Cornyn, who is seeking a 5th term. An all-red campaign spokesperson cited the polls to Newsweek on Thursday in addition to 2 other polls. One from Texas Public Opinion Research showed all-red as the most popular politician statewide at +7 and the only politician with a positive approval rating. A Texas Southern University poll released on May 28th showed the same approval numbers for all-red at a net favorable rating of +7 points. So the article also mentions that Ken Wink, a UT Tyler professor and interim Center for Opinion Research director, told Newsweek in June that Texas is still a red state. That doesn't mean that it's impossible for Democrats to win, but they don't have a very good track record. It's been decades since they won any statewide race, and I think next year is shaping up again to be a pretty good one for Republicans. Representative Jasmine Crockett, in a June 3rd letter announcing her run for ranking member of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, said, "Every hearing, every investigation, every public moment must serve the dual purpose of accountability and demonstrate why a House Democrat majority is essential for America's future." The Texas Democratic Senate primary is scheduled for March 3rd, 2026, which sounds like a long time from now, but that date is going to creep up very, very quickly. Candidates can enter the race before the filing deadline in early December. With 18% of Democratic voters still undecided and party leadership weighing the potential for a competitive general election matchup, the coming months may significantly reshape the field. And again, this article I'm reading is from Newsweek, and I cannot find the publisher. Oh, here it is. The publisher was Nick Mordowanek, wrote this article. So make sure to go check that out. This is very interesting here because we've talked about the Texas Senate race on my channel pretty much in depth now, and a large part of it has been the Republican primary between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton and how that's all shaping out. Now, as of the time I'm recording this video, there has been a late-breaking announcement where Ken Paxton and his wife, I do believe, are getting a divorce. His wife released a statement saying that that was happening, and at this point in time, I'm not going to delve into that too much, because quite frankly, I'm not totally sure how that's going to change things in the race. There's some speculation that Paxton could drop out of the race or it could hurt Paxton in the Republican primary. There's also some thoughts that it won't have much of an impact. At this point in time, I think it's kind of too early for me to delve into that, as all the details aren't really out yet. I'm not really sure how that's going to go, but we do know if Paxton stays in the race, Cornyn versus Paxton is going to be a very competitive primary that thus far, Ken Paxton has had an early lead over John Cornyn so far. Could that change? Yes, but Paxton is led. And that's opened up the door for the Democrats at trying to win this race, hoping to flip this Republican Senate seat to the Democratic side. Colin Allred, the Democratic nominee for Senate in 2024, has declared a few days ago that he is running again. But 3 other Democrats, Joaquin Castro, Beto O'Rourke, and James Tallarico, all have expressed interest in entering this race as well. The Democrats would likely try to avoid a contentious Democratic primary as much as possible to make it a unified effort at going after the Republican nominee. And to be quite frank, the Democrats have a much better chance at winning this election if Ken Paxton's the Republican candidate instead of John Cornyn. John Cornyn, who has some dislike from a lot of the more MAGA wing of the Republican Party, would not alienate moderate Republicans, Bush Republicans, and independents and such as much as Ken Paxton likely would in a general election. So that's something Democrats are watching closely, who the Republicans end up nominating. But the Democratic side could get interesting as well, especially if U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett were to enter this race. And the most interesting part for Jasmine Crockett is I think she starts out with a high floor of support, is because after the 2024 election, a lot of Democrats, I would either say, are upset or frustrated that President Trump won. And a lot of them are blaming a lot of the leaders of the Democratic Party and don't believe they're doing enough to stop President Trump. And you don't have to look very far, whether it's on the news or on social media or what have you. Jasmine Crockett is being very vocal about her disdain towards President Trump and towards the Republicans in charge of the Senate and of the House. So Democrats will likely see Jasmine Crockett doing that and speaking against the president and the Republicans, and likely will like to hear that. They like to hear that message and want someone they view as going to be a fighter. So that could see Jasmine Crockett's name recognition rise as someone the Democrats like to see run again, or run in Texas for the Senate race in 2026. However, being an outspoken Democrat that gets Democratic voters excited and riled up does not necessarily translate to a general election win in Texas in 2026. As the article mentioned, Texas is a very reliable red state. It could be considered more of a likely Republican state than safe Republican state at this point, but it's not close enough to be a state where a hard right or a hard left Democrat could run on saying everything that President Trump and the Republicans do is bad and likely be able to win that election. It may get very close if the candidate on the other side is very unpopular, though, which in the case of Ken Paxton could be the potential scenario that the Democrats may be facing. If Jasmine Crockett were to win this nomination, I don't think she's one of the stronger general election candidates. I really don't. But I think she would get a lot of attention and enthusiasm for Democrats in this race. And that also means a lot of national money would pour into this race, both for Democrats and for Republicans. However, the Republicans are defending a very narrow Senate map right now, where in my most recent projection, I have the Republicans with 52 Senate seats, Democrats 45, and 3 Senate seats, Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia, as toss-ups. I do have Texas right now starting out as likely Republican, which could be between a 5 and 15% margin of victory for the Republicans. And that is where I have it starting out. Though if Ken Paxton becomes the Republican nominee and these scandals continue to hurt him, I could definitely see Texas getting more competitive and even falling under 5% margin of victory into the lean Republican category. But could Jasmine Crockett actually win this race? That's really contingent on Ken Paxton being the Republican nominee and having essentially everything fall apart. Now, the early polling in this poll from the NRSC could also be a sign, and I've seen this online, of the Republicans trying to get Jasmine Crockett into this race because they believe they'll have an easier time at defeating her in a general election than, say, Colin Allred or Joaquin Castro or Beto O'Rourke. That certainly is a possibility, and maybe Republicans are trying to bait Crockett into running in this race. I'm not totally sure if that's true or not, but I could certainly imagine that the opposite political party would be trying to play tricks like that in this race. But Crockett entering this race would be very interesting, but again, at this point in time, she is not given any official indication if she is going to run or not run in the Senate race. Until she does, I'm going to assume that she's probably not, but that would make the Senate race, which is already very interesting, even more of an interesting topic to discuss for 2026. Now, the political predictions for this race, Inside Elections and Cook Politico have it as solid Republican, Sabro Crystal Ball has it likely, and Race to the White House has it tilt. So, by varying degrees, they all have it at least a little bit favored for the Republicans. For John Cornyn versus Colin Allred, the only poll from YouGov and Texas Southern University from back in May had Cornyn leading by 4 points, where in that same poll, Paxton led by Allred by 2 points. Now, 8% of voters said they were undecided in the Cornyn versus Allred poll, whereas 6% were undecided for Paxton versus Allred. But when you look at the recent election history in Texas, at the presidential level, President Trump won it by 13.7% in 2024, which was a very reliable red win. Back in 2020, though, it was pretty competitive. Trump only defeated Joe Biden here by 5.6%. 2016, with a lot of third-party vote involved, President Trump defeated Hillary Clinton by 9 points. The Senate race, which took place in 2024 between Ted Cruz won over Colin Allred by 8.5%. However, 2026 should be a more Democratic-friendly election environment than 2024 ended up being. Historically, midterm elections are very good for the party that's not in charge of government, meaning the party that does not hold the White House or maybe perhaps the Senate or the House. The Democrats should seek to benefit from that in 2026. So an 8.5% win for Ted Cruz in 2024 could be the ceiling for the Republicans in 2026 at the best case scenario for them, where it could be even more competitive than that, especially if Ken Paxton ends up winning the nomination. Back in 2020, John Cornyn won by 9.6%, but in 2018, the last time there was a Democratic-friendly midterm, Ted Cruz only won by 2.6%. And you can argue with his scandals, if he were to win the Republican primary, Ken Paxton would be even more unpopular than Ted Cruz in the state of Texas in a general election environment. Which is why, again, I say the idea of Ken Paxton being the Republican nominee versus Jasmine Crockett or any of the Democrats, Texas could fall under that 5% margin of victory for Ken Paxton if he's the Republican nominee, due to the fact that we literally saw this happen in 2018 and only a likely Republican win in 2024 in a much stronger Democratic national environment, both for the House and the Senate, could lead to Texas, along with a poor Republican candidate, potentially being more competitive in 2026. Now, for now, I am still starting Texas out as likely Republican, and I'm not sure if Jasmine Crockett's going to run, but I'm not really sure how much she changes things on the Democratic side either, other than she would likely bring in a lot more attention and national money on both the Democratic and Republican sides into this race. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, though. Leave your comments down below if you think this would be a good move or a bad move for the Texas Democrats, and how do you think she would do in this race. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.